Hi, this is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government. My question for today is, when will they ever learn? It's a shocking today that there's a story out that Boston University has been tinkering around developing a different COVID virus, virus that they say is actually less deadly than the original COVID virus. What they did was they took the original COVID virus and they put an Omicron virus spike on it. And according to their research, that variation killed 80% of the mice that it was infected into, whereas the original COVID virus killed 100% of the mice. So Boston University is saying it's less dangerous than the original COVID virus. My question is, what the heck are you doing? Haven't you been paying attention for the last 2.5 years? Developing these viruses is dangerous. We have a moratorium on federal funding being used to develop these kind of viruses. And there is no excuse for this, for the Boston University or any other university virology lab to continue developing new deadly viruses. Right now, let's get our arms around what the problem is. Let's figure out how to deal with this. Let's put safeguards in place, because while this might be valuable research to discover how to defeat viruses in the future, it is dangerous research now, given that one of these viruses escaped from a lab and ended up killing millions of people across the earth. And simply no excuse for Boston University continuing with this research. There's a little bit of controversy whether or not the federal government funded this research. The agency of the federal government that Dr. Anthony Fauci runs, the National Association of Allergies and whatever it is a part of National Institute of Health, but not the National Institute of Health. It is a part of it, but it's the Allergy and Infectious Disease section of our whole health establishment. And that group, Dr. Fauci's group, did give grants to Boston University for research along these lines. Boston University claims that the dollars that they received from the federal government were not used in this research. It was used in research which developed a component that they needed to actually do this research. But it's in that murky world of, once you give somebody money, and money's fungible, you move it around, and suddenly the money might have been, there's no way really to know if the money was used for this or not. Federal government is conducting investigation. Certainly, one of the key elements here is because Boston University claims that they didn't use federal government money to do it. They didn't work with the federal government in terms of making certain safety protocols and like were being followed, which once again, we're living in a dangerous world. And I think any reasonable person at this juncture, would sit there and say, it's time to stop playing mad scientist. It's time to kind of pull our horns in a little bit, and let's get our arms around how to deal with this, how to make certain that we don't have another lab leak, that what we do doesn't inadvertently cause something else to happen elsewhere in the world. At some point, we have to get smart. And by getting smart, it means to slow down. Let's figure this out. Doesn't mean research is bad, but darn it, over 1 million Americans died because of COVID. Our economy was destroyed because of COVID. Our civil liberties have been violated for years because of COVID. People have died, ODs and the like have gone up by 50% because of COVID and the social isolation that was created. There is no excuse. Our children went to school didn't go to school, and then they went to school in masks, and their actual progress in school is dramatically less than it would have otherwise been. We have long-term societal ills that are going to occur and are going to afflict this nation for years and years to come, and maybe for an entire generation, because of COVID. So what the heck are you doing? Boston University, what are you doing? It's just some stories are just unbelievable. And they may not have done anything against the law, but at some point, when is it going to be smart enough to say, oh, it's not against the law, but given where we are in history, this might be a really bad idea to pursue. But apparently, when it comes to tinkering and creating new organisms, there is no break on the hubris of the scientific community. And because of that, the scientific community is going to face some real challenges. So perhaps those universities out there should really think twice. One of the things we know is that the federal government and Anthony Fauci gave money to a group that was funding research at the University of North Carolina, and then was operating at the Wuhan lab in China, doing gain of function research. And gain of function is nothing more, nothing less than altering a virus to make it so it functions differently as it relates to different species. So you take a bat virus and you turn it into a virus that might affect monkeys or humans, for that matter. So that's all that is. But we're not supposed to be. We've got a moratorium on doing that in this country because of what happened with COVID. And these guys just need to stop tinkering with the building blocks of life and take a step back so our understanding can catch up with our capability. So our ability to restrict access, to make certain that there's 100 safeguards that it doesn't leak out is in place. There's a place, there is a place for doing this. One of the ways you find vaccines and you find cures and you find a way to kill a virus is you make the virus, and then you test a bunch of different things against it, see what negates it, what knocks it out, what stops it most effectively. And that's one of the ways you create vaccines. That's one of the ways you learn about these viruses. And it's one of the ways that you are able to then provide treatments downstream for these viruses. So the research itself isn't necessarily bad, but folks, it's time to put a break on it. It's that simple. This virus and the political ramifications of it, not just the human ramifications, the political ramifications, have created a massive disruption in civil liberties in our country, has done more to alter the relationship between individuals and the state in the United States of America than virtually anything in our history. And so not only has it killed more than well over 1 million people, not only has the reaction to it caused us to have an inflation rate, which is, has more than tripled since 2020, since Donald Trump left office, because the political reaction was to keep spending money, keep pumping the economy. And so that was the fiscal reaction. And as a result, we now face an inflation spiral that's devastating. It's going to be devastating to people across this country. It's going to be devastating to people on fixed incomes. Those are all the outcomes, the downstream, unplanned, unexpected outcomes of the release of one of these viruses. Just one. And it's time that our research community become adults and stop playing God and just let the system catch up. It's that simple. I'm going to take a look at some of these things. Yeah, Linda, it's pretty unbelievable. When some of the headlines on this were a little more dramatic in terms of what was contended that it was more deadly than the original and things like that. That doesn't appear to be true. And so one of the reasons I'm doing this is I want to get actual facts, where I'm getting my facts from. And just so you know, I'm going to bring over, here you go. Oh, I don't want to do that. I want to add that to the stream. I want to bring, this is from STAT, and it gives a pretty comprehensive view story on what happened. And it does provide the Boston University Labs perspective in it, which I think is fair. But when you read this story in STAT, what you discover is exactly what I just laid out. It's and so, but that is this is where you find this is statnews.com. I'm going to put that in the comments. And so statnews.com, and it's an article by Helen Branswell. And I'm going to even go wild. I'm going to put the old URL in there. And, once again, we want to inform. We want to make certain, it's as outrageous as it is, but we want to make sure it's right. And so I've provided you the details in the comments section so you can look at it and click on the link and read the story for yourself. But it's crazy. It's crazy what's going on. John, there's a reason why. First of all, you can't outlaw it worldwide because China will do whatever they want to do. And they're developing biological weapons every single day using viruses. And as a result, which is exactly what the Wuhan lab appeared to have been doing, a lot of research shows that they were doing that. Now, whether that was what the Wuhan virus was or not, I can't say. What I can say is that that a lot of countries around the world do engage in biological warfare, actually, research. And so part of the reason for doing this is to develop countermeasures to biological warfare that other people are developing. So that's one of the reasons why, at least rationalizations for continuing it, but continuing it without safeguards and additional safeguards is just beyond comprehension. Let's see here. Obama did close down the Chapel Hill research and University of North Carolina. That's exactly right. And of course that research was then transferred, and the company that was the research company that the grants that the University of North Carolina was using at Chapel Hill were using, that company then went off and took that research and took it to Wuhan. And, a few years later, we end up with a release. Now, whether or not 1 and 1 gets to 2 on that, I can't say for certain. But what I do know is, yes, Obama did shut down that research and put a moratorium on gain of function viral experiments, just as Lisa mentions. So thank you for that, Lisa. Let's do the and so let's just in terms of this. One of the things that I think people need to do when thinking about this story is let your members of Congress know that you want them to prevent this kind of dangerous research from occurring without significant safeguards. And it's a little bit Dr. Frankensteinish that, a university lab, and we have to assume this is happening all over the country, are busily developing these things. And I'm a free market guy. BU is a private university. I used to know a guy who, when I was in college, who went to BU, we called him BU Bob, but nonetheless, it's a private university. They've got research that they do. They've got, really smart people doing it, doing things that I could never do, certainly. But the fact that there aren't universal standards for maintaining a safe environment so that there is an ability with a disease, with these viruses that are, uh, deadly, extremely deadly, that there's no universal kind of, you have to follow certain procedures, and you have to make certain that what you're doing uh, is at least reported to the appropriate agencies within the federal government, so we have uh, we know what's going on in terms of this kind of research. The fact that that's not occurring and that the only safeguards on this are against the federal government funding of it is somewhat disconcerting. And I have never been for more regulation. In this regard, there should be reporting standards and standards of care for storage and for development of these type of viruses, because we have thousands of research universities out there, and not all of them are getting federal money on this. And even BU was getting federal money, but they contended it was federal money that wasn't used for this particular research, although what was developed from that funding was used in this research. Because money is fungible, at the very least, universities and labs should be providing information on all research of this type in a secret, top secret kind of communication mode, so it isn't available to be stolen by anybody who has to be lurking online. But there should be communication between the federal government and making certain that we do have safeguards against the release of these kind of viruses. It's absurd that there isn't. Unfortunately, these kind of labs exist around the world, and it makes the world a more dangerous place. Let's just put it that way. It makes it, when we all have seen just how dangerous it is and how there are no borders when it comes to a virus, when we all get on planes and fly around the world nonstop. It's that there are no borders when it comes to a virus. So that's where we're kind of going on it. Let's change subjects a little bit, because I don't know if it got in the email, but I wanted to talk about something else also. It's kind of irritating me. Crime, we've seen, because of things like our open borders, immigration policy, the 50% increase since 2019 of drug deaths, of drug overdose deaths. We've seen the whole Black Lives Matter defund police movement, emasculate our police departments, make it so police recruiting becomes almost impossible, make it so the police are not going in and interdicting at a time of a crime, but instead are waiting for the crime to be over and then cleaning up the mess. It's really been transformational, the intimidation of our police. The same police, for instance, in New York City, that 20 years ago, everybody wore an NYPD hat out of respect for the police who ran into the World Trade Center to get people out rather than running away from it. For the police who died at the World Trade Center trying to save innocent victims of that terrorist attack. And 20 years later, we have a world where the same police are under attack by New York State government, by the prior administration of the New York City government, and we're on the defensive, where the anti-crime policies that have been effective in cleaning up New York City have been eliminated, where we're now engaged in something, the cash bail policy that's been put in place in many of our cities, most of our large cities, effectively creates turnstiles, because people get arrested but they don't have to post bond. So effectively, they get arrested and they walk out the door until their trial. And because they're walking out the door before their trial, the cop who arrested them is still filling out paperwork. It's literally that cliche. They're getting out the door before the paperwork's even filed. And that's what's happening right now in cities across the nation. It's resulted in San Francisco having another thing that's happened is decision in California was done by initiative to eliminate all property crimes that were under $950 and say that we're not going to prosecute them as felonies. We're going to prosecute them as misdemeanors, meaning district attorneys in places like San Francisco and Los Angeles have been effectively not prosecuting those crimes. They've been not prosecuting property crimes. And we've seen mob thefts where organized mobs, go in places that ranging from a Walgreens, which is a drugstore, like a CVS or a Rite Aid, going into a Walgreens and just stripping the shelves bare, and then leave and literally jump into their cars and drive off, having blocked the police through the cars that have been parked around the attack, blocked the police from being able to get to the building. We've seen that. Walgreens is shutting down their operations in San Francisco as a result, because they cannot, you can't exist if your products are always being stolen. And that's causing the operations in Walgreens to shut down in San Francisco. We're seeing Louis Vuitton in San Francisco had people do the same thing and just go in and literally strip the shelves bare of handbags, shoes, all the various fashion items that they have. And with really no recourse, no prosecution unless it was over $950. So if there's not going to be prosecution, you know what police aren't doing? They're not looking through the videotapes trying to figure out who's doing it. And it means it's essentially treated as a crime that there's no accountability for. And that's what's happening in California. And it's largely a result, not only of the law, but prosecutors who got elected in 2019, largely with support of a George Soros funded PAC, super PAC, that elected prosecutors across the country in big cities and counties with the express goal of emptying the prisons and eliminating property crimes for all intents and purposes, and eliminating drug prosecutions. The results are we have an increase in crime. Big shock. You let people out of jail and you emasculate the police, and prosecutors don't prosecute. What's going to happen? You're going to have higher crime rate. And that's what we have. But it's on the ballot. We saw the San Francisco district attorney recalled, Soros-funded district attorney, by the way, whose parents were, his dad's still in jail for being involved in a Brinks armored car robbery in the early 1980s as a member of the Weather Underground. The Weather Underground being the violent wing of the 60s protest movement that regularly blew up banks, blew up various public and private entities. So no peaceful protest there. The prosecutor, who was 18 months old when his parents were convicted of this crime, his dad's still in jail. The prosecutor, he was raised by Bernadette Dorn and William Ayers. If William Ayers sounds familiar to you, William Ayers is the person who essentially was also Barack Obama's mentor and was involved in the Weather Underground, as was Bernadette Dorn. So there's this network of 60s radicals who now have money from the Soros network that are seeking to undermine the very essence of the law, and particularly undermine any drug laws and any property crimes. Because if they can undermine property crimes, suddenly, if you don't like private property, the single best way to get rid of them is to make it so people feel like they can steal whatever they want from you, at which point you really don't have private property. And so that's one of the attacks that have been made. Like I say, the San Francisco DA was voted out in a recall in June. The LA DA, who is similarly problematic, has been fighting to keep signatures off the ballot so he doesn't have a recall election. So there's been a fight in LA. We have recall efforts in Northern Virginia related to Soros-funded prosecutors in a couple of major counties in Northern Virginia in the Washington, D.C. suburbs. We have, a Soros DA in St. Louis, who, by the way, when we had the Ferguson riots, that's the DA who was front and center, was a Soros DA, blaming the police once again, illegitimately, for defending one guy defending himself against an attacking, somebody who was attacking him. And so, but the St. Louis DA didn't care about that. There's an agenda to dismantle the police departments in this country. Minneapolis, defunded their police department, then discovered, that was a bad idea as crime skyrocketed. And now they're trying to reassemble it. But guess what? Who wants to go to work in Minneapolis in the police department when the people who are your bosses hate your guts and are going to try to prosecute you or bankrupt you if they don't like something you did in terms of the street enforcing the law? Nobody's going to do that. And once the bottle's broken, it's really hard to put it back together. We have New York City, which the subway system has more homicides in the last 2.5 years than occurred in the previous 11. Some people are now calling the New York subway system the murder express. We're seeing property crimes and other crimes skyrocket in New York City. In fact, the Major City Mayors Association just a few days ago came out with a study that said that murders in the 50 major cities have gone up by, let me make sure I got the number right because that's important, 50% since mid-2019. I'm going to click here. You'll see this is an article that I wrote that's up on Daily Torch today. I wanted to talk about because usually we write these articles the day before, but this one was stuck in my head, and I wrote like 6 different articles before I settled on just narrowing it down to this. But this is a problem across the country. And while the polling shows inflation as being the number one issue and kind of skirts around the crime issue, the fact of the matter is, when you look on the streets and you're worried about drugs, well, the Soros DAs aren't prosecuting drug crimes. When you look at fentanyl deaths and opioid deaths, which are up, by the way, also up 50%, over 112,000, I think, last year. Maybe 108, but somewhere in there. And before, in 2019, we were down in the below 70,000. I mean, a huge spike in those deaths. In fact, it's down in the 60s. It's a problem, and people feel it. People know there's something wrong. People know that this is out of control. When people don't feel safe going out of their homes when they used to, they say this is wrong. Something's wrong. And when San Francisco, one of the most liberal places in the world, throws out their district attorney because he won't enforce the law, please understand, this isn't about Republican and Democrat. This is about maintaining civil society. and the basic rules of the road of our world that we live in. And when the basic rules of the road are broken and we can't decide as a society whether we drive on the right side of the road or the left side of the road, so we have anarchy, at that point, that's when dictators take over to dictate, to make certain that they make the trains run on time, which is something that the Italians credited Mussolini with. That's what's dangerous here, folks. So when you go to the polls, you get people, you talk to people about this, understand that this attack on the rule of law, this attack on the enforcement of the laws that were created by legislatures, elected legislators. They made the laws of the land. And when prosecutors say, I am negating those rules by not prosecuting those crimes, when that happens, all these people want to talk about democracy being under attack. That is the ultimate attack on democracy. When a prosecutor says, I am going to negate the will of the people by not prosecuting crimes that the people of that state have decided should be prosecuted and should have a certain punishment. If you want to change the law, go to the state capitol, change the law. But for a prosecutor to do it unilaterally is a direct attack on the system of governance that we have, and saying your vote for state legislature doesn't matter. Your vote for governor doesn't matter. The only vote that matters is a vote that for prosecutor between people you don't know who they are. And one of them ends up, in the case of the prosecutor in Loudoun County, Virginia, ends up with over $800,000 in donations from the Soros Super PAC to win by 1.5% over their opponent, who didn't get $800,000 of money flowing into their account to influence votes, to make a case. So, folks, we live in dangerous times. You have a vote. Ballots are out now. November 8th is election day. You have a vote. Crime is on the ballot. If you like the status quo, if you like the Democrat majority that stood up and said, we want to defund the police just 2 years ago, if you elect them, if you reward them with another term, with being in leadership for another term, then crime's not only the ballot, crime will accelerate. And the crime that may be in an inner city today will find its way to your city tomorrow. That's what I got. This is Rick Manning. I'm going to sit there and take a look at some more of these things. I'm going to just look. I know Soros is spending millions to put them in office, but the voters aren't always getting paid to vote for them. So why are they not out? Is it cheating in the votes? Betsy, the answer is most of the prosecutor races, most people don't know who they are. Okay. So if you sit there and I can basically tease out of the voter rolls who is most likely to vote with my position and who's most likely to vote against my position. And so given that, what happens is if you have enough money, you can identify the people who are most likely going to vote for you. And you can do a lot of things to encourage them to get out to vote for a specific candidate. And the opponent, because they don't have money, isn't able to, doesn't do the same thing. And so you get people like the guy who won in San Francisco. He won by less than a percentage, and he won because of a crazy vote counting way they count votes in San Francisco and now in Alaska and some other places called ranked choice voting. So it's not cheating because they don't have to cheat to do this. These are low turnout elections. People don't know who to vote for, particularly if there's not a party designation. And as a result, the person who's able to communicate their message most concisely to the people who are most likely going to respond to it in a very targeted way and turn those voters out wins. And that's how George Soros has basically gotten 20 to 30 prosecutors in place in 2019. And we're now bearing the poison fruit of that success. So I hope that helps answer your question, Betsy. They're going to turn America into a police state that defund our cops is all. Yeah, that's exactly right. The fact is, they want, when we start seeing people defending themselves. We saw Kyle Rittenhouse, for instance, defending himself. The prosecutor in Milwaukee was more than willing to go after him, as Waukegan, which is outside of Milwaukee. The prosecutors were more than willing to go after him because that was the agenda. It wasn't until Rittenhouse got acquitted because the prosecutors had to give up the actual videotapes that existed of what occurred. And the videotapes showed in every instance when Kyle Rittenhouse shot an attacker, he was trying to escape and somebody was attacking him. But the people who are pushing this are trying to create conflict. They know that they can break the rules, the basic bonds of society, the rule of law, where you and I decide the law no longer is fair. It's no longer provides equitable. There's no equal justice under the law. It's no longer blind. As we conclude that throughout our lives, the natural thing to occur is to say, well, why am I following it? And that's when you get the anarchy that Ricky James is talking about that justifies the martial law and the police state, where they have to enforce the laws, not based on the consent of the governed, not based on equal access to the law, not based on the equitable or the equal enforcement of the law, the blind justice, not based on any of that, but based on just blatant fear and a knowledge that if you happen to be on the wrong political party or have the wrong thought process, a thought process that isn't approved by by whoever's dominant, by the majority, by the leftist majority, that you're in danger. Your freedom is in danger. That's what they're trying to do. November 8th. That's how we're going to stop them. With that, thank you. And this is Rick Manning. I'll have a happier one tomorrow. I promise. I'll do something that's happy, joy tomorrow. Maybe we'll talk about the Yankees losing or something. With that, we'll take a time out. We'll talk tomorrow. Take care.